Tonight we are going to look at a very important duration, a very important period in Dr. Babasaheb Ambedkar's life, and our journey is going to be very thrilling and exciting tonight because we are going to travel to various parts of the world. Last time we saw how in the beginning of 1913 Dr. Ambedkar had to go severe difficulties because his father died in February, and he had a brief stint working in the Baroda city. He has to come back, and once again Dada Kiduskar comes to his help, and he takes a young Bhim to meet Sayajirao Gaikwad, and that meeting between Sayajirao Gaikwad and Babasaheb is very interesting, where Sayajirao Maharaj asks a few questions to young Bhim. He asks, which subject you want to study? Sayajirao Maharaj asks Dr. Ambedkar, which subject you want to study? And young Bhim replies very confidently that he wants to study sociology, economics and public finance. He spelled out 3 subjects. He says very boldly that he wants to study social and public finance. And Sayajirao Gaikwad, who is a very clever man, very intelligent person, he further pokes him. He asks him, what would you do by studying these subjects? What are you going to gain by studying these subjects? And Babasaheb replies that the study of these 3 subjects will help him to reform the society and uplift the society. And Sayajirao Gaikwad is not going to give up so easily on this very young, clever Dr. Babasaheb Ambedkar. So he further asks him, he tries to tease Dr. Ambedkar or young Bhim by asking a question, but according to our pact, you have to serve the Baroda government. You are telling me that you want to uplift the society, you want to work towards the reformation of the society, but according to the pact which is going to be signed between us and which is going to be for the 10 years, you have to serve us. Young Bhim is not trying to appease Sayajirao Gaikwad. He is not trying to please him, but he is speaking very forthrightly and very straightforwardly and very directly to Sayajirao Maharaj, Sayajirao Gaikwad, with his firm intention that he says that he would like to do 3 things together, and he will be fully committed to these 3 things, that he would educate himself, he would serve the Baroda government, and at the same time he will carry on the work of social reformation. And when we look at the life of Babasaheb, we can see that he has not only did what he committed to Sayajirao Gaikwad, but he has also ventured into all different walks of life with his full-blown attention and concentration. So he would prove what he has told to Sayajirao Gaikwad. Then there is an agreement signed between the Baroda government and Bhimrao Ambedkar. So the contract is signed for 10 years. The initial contract is for the 10 years. After the end of the scholarship, which is meant for 3 years, Bhimrao has to come back and serve the Baroda government for 10 years. And in the return of this agreement, which is signed between the Baroda government and Bhimrao Ambedkar, Baroda government sanctions him rupees 500 for his outfit, so that he can go to America with good clothing and with good outfit. And according to the agreement signed between the Baroda government and Bhimrao Ambedkar, the Baroda government will pay 230 pounds every year. So that is the amount or the scholarship sanctioned by the Baroda government, and there is no security required on the behalf of Bhimrao Ambedkar. So on these terms, The agreement is signed between the Baroda government and Bhimrao Ambedkar. So he leaves for New York because the Columbia University is located in the New York City. He has to travel from Bombay to New York. And that time there was not much development in the modes of transportation. So he has to take a ship from Bombay to New York. And that's a very interesting journey if we look at that. So he leaves for New York in the middle of the year. And from Naples in Europe, he boards another ship. So he has to travel via Red Sea, pass the Suez Canal, enter into the Mediterranean Sea and take another ship from Naples, which is a city located in Italy. So he boards ship named SS Ancona. The name of the ship is SS Ancona, which was one of the biggest ships of that period. And this ship, SS Ancona, has got a big history. Though it lived for a very short period of time, it has got a big history because that was a liner which was going transatlantic, traveling from Europe, traveling to New York and to Philadelphia. It has a very interesting path. It was a big shipment and its weight was 8,885 tons. So you can imagine how big the ship was. I got the other dimensions for the ship, but I am not going to spell it out. So Dr. Ambedkar sails from Naples to New York and arrives in New York on 21st July 1913. He arrives in New York by the ship SS Ancona. This ship SS Ancona, which began in the year 1908, its services began in 1908 and it was attacked in the World War I by the German Navy and it was sunk. And it is said that when it was sunk, it was carrying huge stock of gold. So when it was sunk in the year 1915, a lot of people are trying to venture into that area and trying to find the gold or the treasure. So it's a treasure ship. So it was sunk by the Austrian submarine in the Mediterranean Sea on the 7th November 1915 during the World War I. So from this ship, Dr. Baba Ambedkar arrives in New York on 21st July 1913 at about 12 o'clock in the noon. So it must be a very different experience for young Bhim because he was just 22 years that time. Because he arrives late in New York, he misses his summer session. He can't join that session and he has to wait for the next session to begin, which is in the month of September. So we can say though he arrived in New York on 21st July 1913, he missed his summer session and he couldn't join and therefore he has to wait till September to join the course. Now New York is a very interesting place. It's one of the biggest cities in the world and it has got rich and very glorious tradition. So it's divided into 4 major parts. So there is a big island called Manhattan. There is a big island which is one of the richest place in the world, Manhattan. And then there is a place called Queens, Brooklyn and Bronx. Bronx is one of the world's poorest place. It's a contrast. So Manhattan is one of the world's richest place. I would say the most richest place because you've got all the skyscrapers on this particular island. And Bronx, which is majorly dominated by the black population, is one of the world's poorest region. The literacy rate is very low. in this particular part of the world. And New York, in Manhattan and Bronx, they are very close. It just takes a few minutes from Manhattan to go to Bronx. And you might have also seen some of the very violent movies about this area called the Bronx. And Queens is famous for the American Open Championship. So this Manhattan, which is a very interesting place, it's an island. It's an island. And on the upper part of the island, you have Columbia University, Harlem. So the Columbia University is located in the upper Manhattan. And then there is a middle Manhattan, and in the lower Manhattan, you can find the most famous buildings of the world, like the Twin Towers, which were crashed. So the location of the Columbia University, which was previously known as the King's College. The name of the Columbia University previously was the King's College, and it was one of the very famous colleges in the US. And the Columbia University, even today, is the topmost university in the world. Next to Columbia is the Harlem locality. Now this Harlem is very important place for the Black Renaissance, because this area was dominated by the blacks. And the cultural revolution or the Renaissance, it's called the Harlem Renaissance. The period of Harlem Renaissance coincide with the period of Dr. Ambedkar's stage or Dr. Ambedkar's stay in the Columbia University. So some scholars argue that Dr. Ambedkar came to know about the Harlem Renaissance very directly. It is said that he might have also visited the black churches, which were very progressive and trying to give rights and revive the black identity in the Harlem. Even today, Harlem is one of the very active centers of the black movement. Harlem was a very important place for a very important black leader, Malcolm X. It formed the bedrock of his movement. Now, though Columbia University began as a King's College, now it was developed at the time of Dr. Ambedkar into a full-blown university, which with several colleges attached here and there. So in Columbia University, Dr. Babasaheb Ambedkar had a very different atmosphere compared to the atmosphere in the educational institute in India. Now when he was studying in India, the whole atmosphere was polluted by the caste virus. The teachers won't talk to him. The teachers will keep him away. He couldn't study the subjects he liked. He felt and faced discrimination every day. Now once he is in America, he is in a very different atmosphere. Here, he is not experiencing any form of discrimination. He is treated as a human being. His professors are not just the professors and the teachers, but they are very good friends. Because in 1930, when Dr. Ambedkar gave an interview in New York Times, he said that his best friends were from the Columbia days. I think this statement is very significant, that in the caste-based atmosphere or the caste-infected atmosphere, it's very difficult to generate that kind of a friendship. So I'm not surprised when Dr. Ambedkar commented when he was interviewed in the New York Times in 1930 that the best friends he had were from the Columbia University, and he named some of his professors, including Dewey, Shotwell, Professor Seligman. So now he is in New York, and he has enrolled for a degree in economics in MA. So when he arrived in New York, because he was traveling by sea for such a long period, it took months for him to travel from Bombay to New York, and therefore when he arrived in New York, he was seasick. Because when you travel by the sea, the ship sometimes moves like in the horizontal oscillation, sometimes there are very different oscillations because of the sea waves, and your body is not adjusted to that because it's kind of a very different physical setting. So when he arrived in New York, he felt seasick and he didn't want to stay in New York. He wanted to go back home because he felt so sick that he wanted to go back home. But then there is an incident which Dr. Ambedkar related later on, which I think is very crucial to understanding of Dr. Ambedkar's mind, where he says that what kept him going in America? Why did he want to be in America? And I think that's a very important incident that I am going to relate to you. One of his sociology professor, while giving a lecture in the class, he referred to a very important concept, and that concept was consciousness of the same kind. And Dr. Ambedkar was taken so much aback by this concept that the professor was explaining in the class how the social structure, how in any social structure the feelings of my and others emerge, and how the society gets polarized into my and not my, me and not me, I and not I. So this particular concept, this particular reference to the concept of the consciousness of the same kind, and the analysis which the professor gave as to how the society gets divided into various groups, made tremendous impact on young Ambedkar. It made such an impact on young Ambedkar that he decided to stay back in Columbia and study sociology, even if it meant severe sufferings to him. And he was so fond of sociology that he later had a department of a sociology, one of the first departments of sociology in the Siddharth College when he founded it. So his love for studying the sociology, his love for studying the social structure. There are many people in the world who go for studying into the higher areas in order to make money, in order to earn name and fame. But look at Dr. Babasaheb Ambedkar's intention. Even at that period of time, he is 22 years old, he is sick. He is so sick. But still, he determines in his mind that he will go on because he is so intrigued by the knowledge. He is so much taken by the concepts that is being taught in his college. Seligman, who was a very dear friend and a professor of young Ambedkar, they had a very good friendship. So Dr. Ambedkar naturally went to him and he started taking his guidance because he was a professor of economics. Seligman was a professor of economics, and that was a major which young Ambedkar chose to pursue in the university. So when he went to seek his guidance as to how he should pursue his research work, Seligman guided him in a very short sentence. He guided him in a very short sentence. He said that you keep on doing your work. You be focused on your work. You study very hard and you will learn how to do the research. Now what a brilliant professor that Professor Seligman might be, that he encouraged Dr. Ambedkar to study, to keep on doing what he has been doing, and eventually he will learn what it means to be a researcher. So what Dr. Ambedkar did and how he emerged as a very brilliant researcher. The world, I would say, has not seen such a brilliant researcher who ventured into so many areas of knowledge, and yet he gave his best. Not to ourselves, but to the world, because some of the theories in economics that he put forward are even valid today, and their facts cannot be denied. So what Dr. Ambedkar learned when he was in Columbia University is to think independently. He learned to think independently. He read so much. He read so much. He was studying in the lower library in the Columbia University. He was the first to enter the library and he was the last to leave the library. Such a commitment to his reading. He read so much that we have so many evidences that even he studied Buddhism very seriously when he was in the Columbia University. Then, when he was studying in the library, he used to have the small cards where he will put down very important notes that he took that day. So he had small cards, he would write his notes on the small cards, and when he will come out of his library, he was the last person to come out of the library. When he used to come out of the library, he had his pocket full of the cards. His small bag was filled with the cards. His all pockets were filled with the cards. And Dr. Ambedkar, who was very fond of documentation, he preserved those cards, and those cards are still available for the researchers. And someday we might have to look into those cards as to how Dr. Ambedkar took notes. That must be very interesting. He was studying 18 hours every day from morning to evening, and he was taking notes, and he was coming out of the library with his pockets, with his small bag filled with the notes. So I think that must be a very interesting situation, and it will be very good for some scholars to really look into what he studied and categorize that information as to what he studied. So when he was in Columbia, he took, now this is unimaginable. What I am going to tell you now is unimaginable. It's so profound and so good, I would say. So his major was economics, and he took 29 courses in economics. He took 29 courses in economics. He took 11 courses in history. He took 6 courses in sociology. He took 5 courses in philosophy. He took 4 courses in anthropology. He took 3 courses in politics. He took 1 course in German and French language. Now this is something very interesting. This is something which is very difficult to achieve. So many courses, if we just calculate the courses, they are around 50 courses. And he was enrolled in MA for just 2 years. And these 2 years of time, he studied these many courses. So we can imagine the hard work that Dr. Babasaheb Ambedkar has put in order to become most advanced and a knowledgeable person. So many courses. Imagine 29 courses in economics, 11 in history. I am going to repeat it because it's so important. 6 courses in sociology, 5 courses in philosophy, 4 courses in anthropology, 3 in politics, and 1 in French and German language. So his range of knowledge was so wide and so deep. And during this period, from 1913 to 1915, he submitted 2 theses. In 1915, he submitted a thesis on ancient Indian commerce. And in 1916, he submitted a thesis which was titled as The National Dividend of India, a Historic and Analytical Study. In 1916, he submitted this thesis, and this thesis later on became the nucleus of his PhD thesis. Later on, Dr. Ambedkar did a PhD in economics, and the nucleus of that study was the thesis that he submitted in 1916, which was titled as The National Dividend of India, a Historic and Analytical Study. When he was in Columbia, he had very good friends. As he said in the New York Times in 1930, that the best friends he had in his life were from his Columbia days. And I'm going to take a little while to talk about Professor Seligman, who was so good to Dr. Ambedkar. He was such a good friend to Dr. Ambedkar. And his close friend was Lala Lajpat Rai. Professor Seligman's close friend was Lala Lajpat Rai, and Lala Lajpat Rai was living in America that time. He was living in New York. Lala Lajpat Rai, when he saw young Ambedkar entering into the library very early on and leaving the library very late, and he was very much impressed by Dr. Babasaheb Ambedkar, and he and Seligman tried to influence Dr. Ambedkar to take part in the India's independent movement. But Dr. Ambedkar said that he is a student here and his only job is to study hard. Lala Hardayal, who founded the Gadar party on the west coast of the United States, did a research on Buddhism. The small details are very important because Lala Hardayal, he studied the Bodhisattva ideal in the Pali text, who founded the Gadar party on the west coast. Shotwell and Robinson, who were very important teachers in the Columbia University, were the Barnard historians. Now whoever is the Barnard historian, he is a big shot. So these two people, Shotwell and Robinson, they were the masters of the history. And Dr. Ambedkar studied with these historians. If you look at the list of the professors with whom Dr. Babasaheb Ambedkar studied in his Columbia days, the list is very profound and very brilliant. It is like this sky illuminated with the stars. Dewey had a tremendous impact on Dr. Ambedkar. Dewey is sometimes termed as the father of American education system. His ideas, his thoughts, his philosophy affected the American education system so much. His book, Democracy and Education, impacted Babasaheb Ambedkar so much. Dr. Ambedkar loved his teacher so much that he even was able to mimic his teacher. He said that his teaching style is derived from Professor Dewey, John Dewey. He is one of the very important person in America even today. He died in 1952. And when he died in 1952, Dr. Babasaheb Ambedkar was on his way to go to New York. But he was in Rome on the June 2nd, 1952. He planned to meet John Dewey, but when he arrived in New York, John Dewey was already dead. And when Dr. Ambedkar heard this news, he commented that I owe so much to this man. He said that I owe all my intellectual life to Professor Dewey. John Dewey's philosophy, which is called pragmatism, it's a very deep philosophy and it's a process philosophy. It's not speculation about the subjects as to how the world evolved and how the world is going to end. But his philosophy is very practical as to how we can remove the suffering from the present world, how we can better the world, how we can make it more and more a place which will lead to the progress of the humanity. So John Dewey made a tremendous impact on Dr. Ambedkar. Professor Seligman, who gave a recommendation letter when Dr. Ambedkar wanted to study in the London School of Economics and Political Science. So in 1916, there was a debate going on in the Columbia University about the traditional society and the modern society. The topic of the debate was traditional society versus modern society. And that was a seminar organized by Golden Weiser, who is known as a very famous anthropologist. And in that seminar, Dr. Babasaheb Ambedkar presented a paper which to my mind is very profound and very deep paper which Dr. Ambedkar presented in that seminar. The paper which was to become a part of the book which Dr. Babasaheb Ambedkar wrote and which is today famous as the Annihilation of Caste, the paper that Dr. Babasaheb Ambedkar read was titled as The Caste in India, Their Mechanism, Genesis and Development. Now in this paper, Dr. Babasaheb Ambedkar has examined sociological facts and he has taken the so-called established sociologist of his time very head on. And his ideas are so original that you can find seed form many of the today's sociological ideas. And he wrote that paper in 1916, and that time he was just 25 years old. 25 years old, very brilliant mind, well read, is analyzing the caste. He is trying to tell the world how the caste system evolved. He is trying to tell the world how it is developed. And I think that's a very profound paper that Dr. Babasaheb Ambedkar wrote in 1916. And this paper I think was published in Words-Based Literature. The part of the paper was published in the Words-Based Literature of the Month, a journal. The paper was also published in one of the very famous journals of his time. So in 1915, Dr. Babasaheb Ambedkar completed his MA in Economics. On June 2nd, 1915, he completed his MA in Economics, but as we have seen before, the range of the subjects that Dr. Babasaheb Ambedkar studied. And he submitted a dissertation for his PhD, which was titled as Administration and Finance of the East India Company. Now this dissertation is very important even today. It talks about how the provinces and the central government, how they will share their financial resources. Now this is a bone of contention even today between the states and the center. So this study is not only important from the Indian point of view, though it was titled like for the East India Company, the study is not relevant only to the Indian administration, but the study is even relevant today in various parts of the country, of the world. And when Seligman, who wrote the preface to this book, and for this thesis, Dr. Babasaheb Ambedkar was awarded Doctor of Philosophy in 1917. This thesis was accepted for Doctor of Philosophy, and he won a PhD at the age of 26. He was a PhD, he was already a Dr. Babasaheb Ambedkar, he was already Dr. Bhimrao Ramji Ambedkar at the age of 26. So he wanted to study further. But I am going to talk about his Columbia connections for some time. So Dr. Ambedkar was awarded PhD in 1917 by the Columbia University, and he was later on honored with another doctorate by the Columbia University in 1952. And when he was awarded another doctorate, and the new honor was Doctor of Law, and the Doctor of Law was awarded to Dr. Ambedkar in 1952 June 1st by the Columbia University for drafting the Constitution of India, and as a social reformer and a valiant upholder of human rights. Not many people congratulated Dr. Babasaheb Ambedkar, but Dr. Radhakrishnan congratulated Dr. Babasaheb Ambedkar. So in 1952, Dr. Babasaheb Ambedkar went to New York once again to receive the doctorate. And we can see that famous photograph even today, that he is boarding the TWA flight. And when in 1952 he was already a very famous and a big man in India. So a lot of people came to the Santa Cruz airport to see him off. And in New York he stayed at King's Hotel on 116th Street, room number 614. And after 13 days he came back to India by the same airlines, TWA Airlines. Now when he went to New York, for some time he stayed at the Hartley Hall. And then he shifted to Cosmopolitan Club, which is near the Columbia University. And that's a very antiquated building now, a few blocks away from the university, located on the 114th Street in New York. He stayed there for some time, and then he shifted to Livington Hall dormitory. And here he had a very good friend, Naval Bhatena. He was a Parsi boy, and Dr. Ambedkar and Naval Bhatena became friends for lifetime. Naval Bhatena even supported Dr. Ambedkar with some money when he wanted to pursue his education in London. Butros Ghali. When Dr. Ambedkar's bust was inaugurated in the Columbia University, in the library there is Dr. Ambedkar's life-size bust. So on the occasion of that, Butros Ghali, who was then the US Secretary General and also a student and alumni of the Columbia University, he said something very interesting about Dr. Baba Saheb Ambedkar. He said, Ambedkar personified many of the qualities of spirit, mind and heart which animate the ideals and work of the United Nations. Butros Ghali, he was then the Secretary General of the UN. I will repeat it for you. It's a very important statement. Ambedkar personified many of the qualities of spirit, mind and heart which animate the ideals and work of the UN. And when Columbia University celebrated its 250 years or something, they had celebrated their alumni, and they included Dr. Ambedkar as one of the Columbia stars. And when they celebrated Dr. Ambedkar as one of the Columbia University stars, they declared Dr. Ambedkar as the founding father of modern India. So it is not just that we are saying that he is the founding father of modern India, but Colombians also celebrated Dr. Baba Saheb Ambedkar as the founding father of modern India. So after completion of his MA and after submission of his PhD dissertation to the Columbia University, Dr. Ambedkar set off to study further, to study Masters of Science in Economics in the London School of Economics and the Political Science. So he had a letter from Seligman addressed to a very famous professor, Cannon. And how he came to London from New York is a very interesting journey which I am going to relate to you. Because he had no money, he has to find the shortest and the most cheapest route to England. So he took a ship from New York and he traveled to Liverpool. That's a city, that's a harbour city in England. He traveled to Liverpool, and from Liverpool he took a train to London. Now when he boarded the train, he had no money. So he traveled without ticket from Liverpool to London. He comes out of the train station and he has to take a taxi. And he has no money. So he goes by a taxi from a train station to India House, and he requests the people in the India House to pay for his taxi fare. He travels without ticket and he asks the people in the India House to pay for his taxi ticket. Now once he is in England, he kept on going. He didn't want to stop there. He wants to study further. He wants to study law. So he enrolls himself at the bar in the Gray's Inn. He wants to study law. So in England, Dr. Baba Saheb Ambedkar follows the same lifestyle. He goes to the library every morning, he comes out late from the library. He is fully devoted to his research work in economics. He is fully devoted to studying the law. But his 3-year scholarship ends here. And though he requests the Maharaja of Baroda to let him continue his education, the Baroda government wants him back. So they shoot a letter to Dr. Ambedkar and asks him to come and serve the Baroda government. Now Dr. Ambedkar is in a very difficult position. He has such a strong hunger for knowledge. He wants to study, but his contract is not letting him study. And because the scholarship ends after 3 years, he has no money to pursue his education. Now what he is going to do? So he goes to his professor and talks to them and requests them that he would like to continue his education. And his professors very generously allow him to have a period of 4 years. During those periods, he can continue his education. So Dr. Ambedkar comes back to India. Now he has no money and he has to come back to India. So what he has to do? So on 27 July 1917, Dr. Ambedkar sets off for India. So from London he takes a train and comes to Marseilles. And from there he boards a ship called Kaisar-e-Hind to come to Bombay. And he has collected thousands of books in New York, in London. Some of them are the second-hand books. Some of them were very rare books, and he couldn't make them travel with him. So he goes to the parcel office and he goes to a company, Thackers and Company, and he gets his books on the board so that they can reach India. But this period is the period of World War I, and as we have already seen that SS Ancona, the ship by which Dr. Baba Ambedkar travelled in 1913, was sunk by the Austrian Navy. The ship by which his books were coming was also torpedoed, and it was sunk in the Mediterranean Sea during the World War I. So he lost all his books, and we know that Dr. Ambedkar cried. He had tears in his eyes when he heard the news. People in India thought that Dr. Ambedkar is travelling by the same ship which was sunk. People thought that Dr. Ambedkar died. But he returned safely to India via Colombo on 27th August 1970, and when Baba Sahib came to India in 1970, he was 17, he was 26 years old. So this much is for today, and in the next session we are going to continue with 1917, 1918 and 1919.